Sounds good.
Yes.
Okay.
Welcome, as everyone is getting connected and connecting to the audio and the video. I apologize, we had a zoomy situation, but it's been resolved and we're here now. And for those of you who were not here last week or have not had a chance to watch the video from last week, I wanted to do a quick introduction of our guests. Today we have two folks, one leading the charge, Perry, whom we met last week. He and his co-founding partner, Barbara, started something called Goakala. They are a college admission guidance experts. And they are on a mission to level the playing field and access to college admissions. Perry and Barbara are two of the most sought after education consultants in the world. And they've helped children of celebrities, Fortune 500 CEOs, and international business people. They've worked with over 15,000 families in their 30 years in this business. And a few years ago, they realized that they weren't doing anything to help close the massive gap in guidance that sort of exists between folks who have access to private school and counselors like that and folks who don't. So they created an Goakala platform to help all families gain access to their college admission guidance. They're also, if you've seen the Varsity Blues documentary, they are featured in that documentary on the ethical side. So we're very lucky for them to be joining us to give us some nuggets. Last week, we talked about sort of putting together your portfolio, your story, and scaffolding for the 4 years that you're in high school as you prepare to go off in the world and apply to college. This week, we're going to talk about writing your personal statement, your essays, how to, I think, weave some of those parts of your story into a compelling statement that will differentiate you from other applicants in the very large pool of applicants at many of these colleges. So thank you so much for being here, Perry, and for embracing our stars. We're not movie stars at Carnegie Vanguard High School, but we've got 100% GT students who are really academic stars. So with that, I will turn it over.
Great. While I'm just going to say a couple more things, and then while I'm doing that, if everybody could throw in, I don't know if do we have a chat or a Q&A? It doesn't seem to show me on my
We
Zoom.
have a chat. There were so many choices this time on the bottom of Zoom.
I know.
It's sort of more dots. I think you should gain access to the chat that way.
Yeah, we do have a chat, and we have the ability to ask polls or surveys if you'd like. And
right. I would just love if everyone could just real quick throw in the chat what grade your kid or kids are in. Just wanted to get a sense of, like, do we have seniors on here who are, like, you know, obviously on the at the finish line, or juniors who are thinking about it for next year, or just freshmen and sophomores who are planning for the future. So oh, here, there's the chat. Okay, so it looks like we have a 12th. So this could be very helpful for you and timely. A lot of 9th, 10th, 11th. Okay, cool, good to know. So hi everyone. As Danielle said, my name is Perry Kalmus. I'm one of the co-founders of Goakala. Barbara's not feeling well. She is on here. She might message me with some thoughts to add, but she was not feeling well. You know, we, as she said, we started Goakala really to level the playing field in access to college admissions guidance. We think that too many kids don't get the guidance, and then it ends up hurting them in their achieving their dreams in terms of college admissions. And so we were, when we started Goakala, we got backed by some of the biggest names in education, like Google and ASU GSV, which is, GSV is one of the biggest names in education tech, as well as USC's Rossier School of Education, which is one of the top programs in the country. So thanks for being here. Today's focus is obviously the personal statement. This is one of the biggest and most important pieces of your college application. And so I thought I'd carry a similar theme that we did last week, which is mistakes that kids tend to make, very common mistakes, and start there, and then go from there. But before I did it, I thought I'd try this interactive thing. We're going to see how it goes. Feel free to give me feedback if you thought it took too long or whatnot. But I had this idea to read you guys an essay, and I want you guys to hear it. Keep in mind, a college admissions officer, it's top to bottom pretty much once, right? And you'll be lucky if they get to the bottom, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But it's top to bottom once. So I'm going to just read an essay to you, top to bottom once. It can take about 3 minutes. And then I want you guys to jot notes on, did you like it? Why? Did you not like it? Why? And then we're going to talk about it and use that as a sort of jumping off point. So I'm just going to read it to you. You guys are going to listen. And then, like I said, if you have thoughts as I'm reading, feel free to throw them in. But if not, I'll give you a second afterwards to type it. So, sweat and practice grime covered my face as I entered McDonald's with 3 teammates. Fish tacos were awaiting me at home, but I couldn't say no to our Thursday evening after practice tradition. I felt bad for the Spanish-speaking workers behind the counter who probably dreaded the frequent onslaught of rowdy Irvine middle and high schoolers. So I politely ordered a Big Mac, specifying no cheese, and sat down in a slippery booth to dissect today's practice and share some laughs. Although I grew out of my lactose intolerance at age 11, the smell and taste of cheese still makes me gag. Others find this hard to understand and have tried to change my mind, but when I'm convinced of something, there is no bending my convictions. 2 years ago, when I decided my favorite sound in the world was the crack of a new wood bat contacting the baseball in the perfect spot, I committed myself 100% to getting stronger and healthier and haven't veered off course. Exercise, whether it be adding gym workouts and weightlifting to my already vigorous practices, or snowboarding or surfing, brings me purpose. Surfing also brings me memories of my childhood on the beach in Mexico. Although I feel at home when I return to Mexico to visit my mother's family, every restaurant and store worker treats me like a tourist, not extending the same respect as to other Mexicans. My looks appear very American, and this makes me a bit of a surprise and a mystery, like the fact that I throw right-handed but bat left-handed. I have 2 sides to me. Being Jewish is just as important to me culturally as my Mexican roots. My bar mitzvah was one of the most memorable moments in my life. Seeing my mom, family in the audience sacrificing so much to be there to support me, even though their beliefs differed. This clashing of cultures in my life has awakened a passion for understanding the history of my ancestors and what they suffered and experienced for me to live my life today. Learning about the Holocaust and my father's ancestors has strengthened my resolve to pursue my interests with gratitude, passion, and pride. And although Mazatlan is safer today, it is still frequented by policemen in SWAT uniforms and only a short drive from cartel territory, heightening my awareness of the plight of so many immigrants in the U.S. fighting for a new life of freedom and opportunity. Famished after a hard practice, when my number was called, I speedily retrieved my Big Mac and hastily unwrapped it, only to find yellow cheese oozing out of its corners. All of the workers heard me as I respectfully showed my receipt and explained my predicament to the cashier. They looked visibly upset, but took the burger and receipt. This time I waited for the pickup line and could hear the workers talking about me in Spanish. They were bad-mouthing me, accusing me of being a spoiled white kid. I thought about my mom at home making traditional fish tacos and my grandmother in Mexico plausibly getting ready to make my favorite tamales. Realizing that they have had a tough day and an even rougher life, I did not blame them. My experiences have shown me that kindness and understanding truly can make a difference. Instead of getting them in trouble by asking them to speak with a manager, I took a different tact. When they handed me the cheeseburger, I clearly thanked them and asked in perfect Spanish, pardon my accent here, "Puedo tener ketchup, por favor?" Shock and disbelief appeared on their quickly reddening faces. As they handed me the ketchup packets, I realized the small actions or deeds are sometimes all that is needed to promote humanity and bring two worlds together. And a little cheese. Okay, so that's the essay. I would love for you guys to just throw in the chat there's no right or wrong. Well, there is right or wrong in my opinion, but like there's no, we're not going to criticize you or whatever. Just throw in the chat your thoughts on that essay. Someone wrote descriptive, detailed. Give you guys another few seconds here to just throw in your thoughts. Good, bad, strong. I'm hearing good. Someone said wordy, insightful, intriguing. Okay. So I think doesn't talk about what he wants to do. That's a good note. I think that this response that you guys have, you learned about the background. This response that you guys have speaks to why we exist. Okay. I'm going to be very blunt, as you heard me last week. This is a terrible essay, which I know is probably a shock for most of you to hear. And I'm going to hit you with why. First of all, there's nothing interesting in the opening line. Opening paragraph. He orders a cheeseburger at McDonald's, like without cheese. That's like it, right? So I have no real reason to desire to watch it. There's a good degree about someone wrote, I thought he worked at McDonald's. No, that would be a little different, but he actually was just a customer there. He talked about sports. If you remember last week, we'll talk about some of the things you never talk about, sports being one of them. And I am a college athlete. So if I'm telling you it, it must be true. And then some things that you notice that you're just kind of like, my conviction for no cheese is symbolic of my conviction in life. Feels like a pretty strong analogy to make there, right? Like you're, tying it in. Out of the blue, suddenly he's Jewish, suddenly he's Mexican. He's talking about his bar mitzvah. We're going to talk about why that's a huge no-no. And it has nothing to do with him being Jewish. It's just that happened before high school. And we'll talk about that in a second. Suddenly he's Mexican, and then when he thinks about cops fighting the cartels in his hometown, it makes him think of the plight of immigrants in America. That's a real stretch. Okay, because I don't understand how he could do that. Then he realizes in that moment that the Mexicans, he realizes they had a rough day and an even rougher life. Feels like a stretch for a high school kid. And a kid who's coming from sports, hanging with his friends, and he has this like sort of moment of realization. And also, this is a highly insignificant moment. They forgot and they put cheese on it, right? And so he speaks to them in Spanish, catching them, quote unquote, red-handed. And suddenly he ends it with like, that's humanity, right? Like that's somehow better than ratting them out to their boss. Like, I think both are pretty crappy, to be honest with you. So this is not a great essay. Someone said we don't get anything about what he wants to do. You don't necessarily need to have that, although that is probably a strong thing to have in your essays. Yeah, someone wrote too much of irrelevant personal stories. I agree with that. Yeah, this is not a good essay, right? And so I sent that student back to rewrite it from zero, because I just think it doesn't hit on all the important things that you need when you're writing a college admissions essay. So let's jump into the sort of most common mistakes we see when a student turns in an essay to us. Okay. Number one, the resume dump. Okay. This is, and so that you don't get distracted by too much of the gifts, I'm going to leave it up for a second, and then I'm going to go to the next slide where I just take it off. But this is the number one thing students do. And I understand the impetus. It's like, but I do all of these things, right? I got to let them know that I do all these things. Here's the problem. That's all sitting. You're allowed to submit a resume to a lot of schools, and you have your 10 activities. Okay? They already see all that there. All that a resume dump looks like, and what he was doing here wasn't really a resume dump per se, but it felt all over the place, right? Because we're in McDonald's, and then we're in baseball, and then we're in his bar mitzvah, and then we're in Mexico, and then it's like, whoa, there's no coherency to this story, right? And so be very careful of the resume dump. We all see it already right here. I'm sitting here with your application. I see all the things you do. You don't need to tell me about all of them. You can focus on one, maybe a second, but you do not need to hit me with your entire resume. Boring openings. His opening, that opening I just read you, was phenomenally boring, right? I literally shut down. And I want to harp on the opening for a second, and let me get off this GIF so you're not distracted. Here's the concept with the opening, guys. And this is how I want you to think about it. Okay? I'm a college admissions officer. I'm reading 50 I'm making this number up, but roughly 50 applications a day. By Friday, I'm at 250 applications. Probably 225 of them had essays like the one I just read you. They were boring. They were uninteresting. They didn't hit on what I wanted to know. I'm exhausted. It's now 4:45 p.m. on Friday. I'm on my 250th application, and I'm pulling up your application. What are you going to say to me in the opening lines that's going to make me say, oh, okay, this is interesting. I want to know more. That's how you have to think about your application or your essay. I want, actually, this might not work as a interactive concept, but I want you guys to take a second. I want you to think about what are the favorite movies of the teens these days. And oftentimes we get things like the Marvel movies, right? Action movies. And I always ask people, how does every Marvel movie, every single one, all 200 of them that they've flooded us with over these last 10 years, that I know you kids love, I don't, but that's just a personal preference. But how does every Marvel movie start? How does every single action movie start? And I won't ask you guys to put in the chat, but most people can't pinpoint how they start, which is interesting. That's, I come from a Hollywood background. I actually originally worked at when I first graduated college at UTA, one of the big Hollywood talent agencies. And so I was deeply involved in the industry. And it's interesting that, and I get it, most people don't really give much thought to the psychology of a movie on the viewer. But I will guarantee you that very few of you said, every single Marvel movie opens with a crazy action sequence. Why? Why don't they open the Avengers with a scene, maybe at a Starbucks, and it's Iron Man sitting down with Thor for a coffee and discussing classical music? Because you all would walk out of that movie. That's why. Why do they open up with a crazy, insane explosions, people dying, blah, blah, blah? Why? Because that immediately pulls you in. And why am I using a Hollywood example? Because your college essay is storytelling. Okay? You are presenting yourself like a movie. We've all seen bad movies. We've all turned off our Netflix because the movie was that terrible. You have to decide, am I going to be that movie? The one that they turn off, they don't even get through the essay because I couldn't even open with the equivalent of a crazy action sequence, right? Or am I going to be the one that they're like, ooh, okay, like this is pretty cool. I want to see this, right? And so that is a big, big part of the college application. We'll talk about how to execute on that in a second, but I just wanted to sort of hit you with that. Next one, not focused on themselves enough. I cannot tell you how many times a student has turned in an essay. And it's just so you know, for those not aware of it, the personal statement is 650 words. So it's a little more than a page. And single space. And it's 650 words. I cannot tell you how many times I have gotten to word 400 and I almost know nothing about this kid. They're describing their grandparent, they're describing a car they love, they describe whatever it is. Okay, so be aware that this is about you. We need to learn something about you, something interesting, something not in your resume, right? Maybe it's how you think. Maybe it's who you are as a person. Maybe it's your personality. Maybe it's how you are as a member of a community. There's a number of different options for you. But if I've gotten down to 200, 300, 400 words and I haven't heard nothing about you, I'm not getting down to 600. And college admissions officers will stop reading. So that's another one. Another really important one. This happens every single day. Okay. You don't have to put it in the chat. Again, it's a little tougher on Zoom. I want you to think to yourself, how many of you have either a younger sibling who's sub high school, so middle school, elementary school, or some cousins who are sub high school? Okay. Go have a conversation with them. It's not going to enlighten you. And I love kids. I think they're amazing. But when you are in 5th grade, there are rare exceptions where you have done something or engaged in something or had an experience with something that is going to make a college admissions officer believe that they should keep reading. Because we've all met a 5th grader. They're fun and they're wonderful and all that jazz. But they are not intellectual brilliance. They are not, they don't have incredible commentary on world affairs. There's zero that we want to hear from that. So a college admission, if it happened to you before 9th grade, please, 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 please. I know that in your mind, and just so I want to explain it so you understand it, because some kids are like, but that was a big event in my life. And by the way, it only happened 4 years ago. And 4 years is nothing in the scheme of life. We understand that. but it is so massive in the scheme of a middle to high school or elementary to high school. So all the time, kids, I get it all every day, right? When I was in third grade, go talk to a third grader, okay? Nobody wants to hear about what happened in third grade, unless it's like, again, there are some rare exceptions, but it would have to be an extraordinary life event. Okay, I had a student a couple years ago who was on the last, I'm now forgetting the country. He was on the last plane out in fourth grade as a civil war broke out. Somewhere, I'm totally blanking, but he was on the last plane allowed to leave the country. Like, he looked out the window and could see explosions happening. Fine, right? Like, that's an extraordinary life event. It happened. He was, I think, fourth or fifth grade. Like, you can mention that, but if you are going to mention something pre-ninth grade, it literally needs to be a minuscule acknowledgement of it, and then boom, take me to high school. Okay? Really, really, really important.
So Perry, you're saying if there's something like huge that happened that changed a person, then they need to spend a small amount of time just giving the foundation of what that thing was, just for the reader's benefit, but then spend the time on how this changed who you were in high school and why you want to, you know, who you are now.
And what actions you started to take in your life
as a result.
As a result. Yeah, exactly. Okay. This is sort of my favorite. I love the gift, but it's also my favorite point about the college essay. And this is the grand challenge that you have as a student trying to write this essay. And I'll change the slide so it's not annoying with the plane trying to land. But what I always say is, you are trying to land a plane, your plane, in a very narrow runway between two extremes that are very difficult to avoid. One is being cliche, and the other is trying too hard. Okay? What do I mean by that? Don't hit me with some like, and so I learned that I really do need to carpe diem and seize the day, right? It's just cliche. Now, just to be clear, if that is what you learned, there are ways to do it without sort of sounding so cliche, right? But kids do this all the time, right? There are so many cliches out there, right? Like, you know, hard work outdoes brains, or, you know, whatever it is, like whatever the silly cliche is, don't cite the cliche. You can show, don't tell, right? We can get from your story, like, oh, wow, she really figured out that, like, she's got to approach life differently, right? But don't hit me with the cliche. I think that's like a cliche thing to do. Trying too hard, which will lead to something I'm going to talk about in a minute. Trying too hard is something like, I'm just going to make something up ridiculous, but like, here's the thing about paper clips, right? And you're trying to draw this like real, like, by the way, what I was talking about, like with this kid, like drawing in that essay I read to you, drawing the analogies between like not ordering cheese and that, and that's why he has so much conviction in his life, like, right? It's just trying too hard. And so kids all the time will come up with these really bizarre trying too hard analogies. And part of the reason they do it is because they go online and they read about these essays. And we're going to talk about that in a second and why you should never do that. But all the time, people will say, like, here's the thing about paper clips. And then they go on to this long-winded thing, and it really is quite the stretch to make it about them. but they want to try and, impress the officer. And anytime, just to be clear, as we're about to get to, do not go online and look for these things. Anytime you've read about someone who has claimed, and be very careful online of what you're reading, because you do not know who was actually accepted, did they actually use that essay, etc. But if you read something about someone feeling like, Barbara loves to use this example, like the pencil versus the eraser, right? It worked once. It will not work a second time. Okay. So please try and avoid those two extremes. Next, this sort of falls in the cliche category. No quotes. Do not quote anybody. You could quote, like, just to be clear, if there was a conversation happening, right? Like, that's not really a quote, right? It's like, oh, I turned to my friend and said X, and my friend said Y, like, that's different. I'm talking about, like, and we get this all the time, right? Napoleon Bonaparte once said, until you spread your wings, you'll have no idea how far you can fly. No, right? You only have 650 words. It's a short essay, relatively speaking. Colleges, the view of quotes, okay, is you took up a lot of space that could have gone towards something more about you. Okay. And the reality is very few people are going to believe that this quote, right, ended up on your mind in the moment, right? And kids always do this, right? And as I sat there reflecting, I thought about Napoleon Bonaparte. No, you didn't, right? Like, I love you all. I think you're amazing. You did not think about Napoleon's quote. Okay.
Terry, I have a question.
Yeah.
May I ask a question? So 650 words, is that for the Common App personal statement?
Yeah, that's the big Common App essay. And I should just real quick before I go on. The Common App essay, the personal statement, is the essay that sort of all schools are going to receive. And then, just so we're clear, not every school, but a lot of schools have what's known as the supplemental essay. So just because it's on the top of my mind, Georgia Tech has been, they have been asking why Georgia Tech. I've been doing it for 20 years. Barbara's doing it for 30. I've never not seen it. Right. So most schools stick with the same essays and questions, although this year with the whole Supreme Court thing, it's probably the most amount of upheaval in essay questions that we've seen ever. Yeah, so every school, not every school, but a lot of schools will have these supplemental essays where you can jot down, why are you choosing the major you chose? Tell us about an extracurricular activity that's meaningful to you, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all kinds of questions. And those tend to be, a handful have 100, 150 words. I'd say most fall between 200 and 400 words. And then there's a handful that go above it. Like if you apply to Cornell, Cornell has the Y Cornell, and that's a whopping 650 words. So it's a lot. So does that answer the question?
Yes.
Cool. And then Barbara brought this one up earlier. When you write your essay, okay, I want you to, and you're sharing it. A lot of people like to share it with their friends, their family, right? If they have a private counselor. And I want you to pretend that you're an admissions officer. Okay, let me get the GIF out of there. I want you to pretend that you're an admissions officer. And I want you to read that essay and present what you've learned about this student. It's a really helpful exercise. Right? Because it'll let you know, like, okay, if I were an admissions officer, how would I feel about what I just learned? Right? And maybe that'll help you improve your essay to add certain things that might add certain elements of who you are as a person. So I think it's a really helpful practice to do. A couple things to avoid, okay, as you're writing your essays. Generally speaking, avoid mental health. Okay, I'm a huge mental health proponent. However, you don't want an admissions officer to sit there and be like, whoa, boy, we've got a crazy on our hands, right? Or, oh boy, I don't want to deal with this kid's problems, right? And I know this runs afoul of the sort of like a lot of people say, well, but I haven't had a crazy traumatic experience in my life, right? And I hear that I got to have something like that to get into Harvard. Look, all of this writing is a delicate balance. And we just think, you could say I had mental health things before, but now, today, I'm totally healed and here's what's happening and blah, blah. You can maybe go down that path, but we generally try and avoid it just because, again, I'm trying to build a class, right? I'm imagining what kind of a kid is this going to be on our campus? Are they going to bring this trauma into their dorm room and be a difficult roommate? Are they going to bring it into the classroom and be a difficult student? They're going to bring it just to the school and be a difficult community member. And so I would, generally speaking, avoid it. Again, just to be clear on all these guidance, right? Like even on the quotes, these are by and large for the 99% of people, right? There are the rare exceptions. Maybe that a quote does make sense. Okay, but I just think it's really helpful to avoid most of these just because they are very rare exceptions. Avoid huge words. I love this GIF. Don't be, I think the word is sesquipedalian. That's when people use big words. It's a little bit, if you actually know the definition, actually means like using like actual long words. But you get the point, okay? This is not some opportunity for you to show your ability to use a thesaurus, okay? All the time, kids come to me and they say, oh, well, I was saying that this was really harmful, but I think I'm going to go with deleterious. You don't know that word, nor do you use it. Okay, so be very careful. Now, listen, if you are going to be an English major, right, and you are an amazing writer and you're part of, the school newspaper and the literature club and, all of the literature, what do they call those journals? But if you're one of those people, you can maybe get into it, but don't think that just because you're using a big word that anyone's going to be impressed. And by the way, most kids that try and use the big words, I have found, are using them in the wrong context, right? They're misunderstanding the meaning, like sesquipedalianism, right? It's not actually the proper meaning for what I'm talking about right now. I just thought it was a funny GIF. But don't do it just to try and do it. If it's a natural way of your being, sure, you read a ton of books, your vocabulary is impressive, great. But no one is going to be impressed with you because you found a way to use deleterious instead of harmful. Which brings me to the point I brought up before. Oops. Please, God, avoid TikTok. Okay? Or Instagram or Google.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Referring to it, or what does that mean?
Yeah, this is not a statement on your social media habits, just to be clear. This is a statement on so many kids come to me and they say, well, I was on TikTok and this guy read his essay and it was about paper clips and he got into Harvard. Okay. If you were here last week, guys, you saw my talk about just how many pieces fit into the college admissions pie. That guy who wrote about paper clips or the pencil versus the eraser or whatever trying too hard essay, came, they didn't also tell you that they had this GPA and that test score and their parents knew a board member and they were an athlete. They were also a band member, and they didn't tell you any of that. So be very careful about these kids who love to get on there, and it's the classic. This essay got me into Princeton, right? This essay did not get you into Princeton. And again, one, you don't know if that essay is real. There's plenty of people who know that there are a lot of teens out there who are going to read this, and that's going to give them a lot of or view it, and they're going to get a lot of views, right? So they love to write things, and you don't know if they even ever went to Princeton or if they ever even were accepted, right? So be very careful of that. You don't know if it was the essay they used. Like I said, a lot of people are doing these things for views. So, but there's also these books, right? The top 10 essays to get into the Ivy League. These are, please do not listen to these. Do not do anything with these. Number one, it's going to make your essay likely be less authentic, right? Because you're going to sit there and be like, you're going to have this temptation to want to be like, ooh. Like, if they wrote about a paperclip, I'm going to write about a staple. Right? And I'm going to draw this ridiculous analogy about how the stapler is a metaphor for life, right? It's going to appear really inauthentic. And also, like, if it happened to have been used, and I do think that's a big if it happened to have been used, just remember it's been used. Right? Like, you can't then go do it again. And so it's completely unhelpful to read these essays. Okay?
As a total aside, there was a New York Times daily podcast last week that was talking about people consuming TikTok. 43% get their news entirely from TikTok, and how dangerous it is and how it influences and changes people's opinions and everything. And so I can't remember, it may have been young people. I don't know if the 43% was age, dependent, but I just want to reinforce.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to be really careful with this stuff. And then the last thing, guys, just because everyone asked about it, ChatGPT, really quick and easy. Do not use it. Like, it is generally, the essays that I've seen it produce are not impressive to me. They are going to definitely come across as oftentimes inauthentic. I do think schools are working actively behind the scenes to be able to detect if a AI created it. So I wouldn't want to be the one that gets caught. And so I think there's just a million reasons not to use it. So don't. So I'll open up for questions. The last thing, and actually, let me just do this real quick, because this is sort of the last thing. I just wanted to read you a couple of quick before and afters, because here, let me so a couple quick before and afters, so that you could sort of hear the differences, and I think it's very helpful to hear these. So let me start with, actually, I'm gonna start with this one from a Chinese student that I had, who was from China, and I want to hit you with something that's really important to remember. Okay, so her original essay started like this: pointing to the Chinese character 2 on the blackboard, I told the students this character has several meanings. When used as a noun, it refers to soil and all other materials related, such as mud, dust, and clay. If used as an adjective, it means something unfashionable. A girl raised her hand and asked, "Are we 2?" Now, This actually was a relatively strong opening, but here's the problem. This girl went for one weekend, and her entire community service resume was this one weekend. She got like 20 hours or something, right? And she worked with these kids in rural China, right? And I've had this before where I've read things where I'm like, wow, that's really cool. Like, how often did you do that? And they're like, oh, I just did it that day, right? And that was like their whole thing. You can't put the most important thing about you. This is your application, right? This is your big essay, and have it be about something that you're not truly passionate about, right? So I started talking to her, getting more information about her, and then she told me something I couldn't believe. And I was like, oh my God, that's your essay. So the essay became, in China, when we talk about America, people usually speak of the glamour shopping in New York City on Fifth Avenue or the pop culture celebrities of Hollywood. So you might imagine my shock when I landed in a small neighborhood in Minnesota in the middle of winter in minus 16 degrees, right? This is a great opening, but I'm going to continue with it because it gets even better. Wow, the quarterback caught the touchdown, a disabled person yelled. In all honesty, I did not know what a quarterback was, or a touchdown, or the entire sport of football for this matter. And you might also imagine the shock of my male friends when they found out that I was at the Super Bowl. For all of the special nature of this event for Americans, it was special for me for a different reason. I saw disabled people. Think about that. Like, that's a whoa. What do you mean? That's weird. We see them everywhere. We see them in movies. We see it, right? This is a shock and like fantastic opening because as a admissions officer, you're going to sit there and be like, whoa, what do you mean that's weird? I want to know more, right? And she goes to talk about how basically China doesn't have all the ADA requirements that the US has, and blah, blah, blah. And it's this whole thing, and it feeds into the actual work that she's working on, and it's fantastic, right? I wanted to read one more. This was where'd it go? Here we go. Ever since the 2016 presidential election, when issues and facts were ignored while insults and innuendo grabbed the headlines, I have been deeply troubled by hyperpartisan politics, coupled with media reporting slanted in pursuit of ratings. Frustrated that my generation had no voice in the process, I knew I needed to do something. In our freshman year, my friends and I threw around a number of ideas, blah, blah, blah. I'm falling asleep in this essay. Okay? Nothing interesting is happening. And then we got down later on and I saw something and I was like, oh my, like, that's how you have to start your essay. This is the most ridiculous thing I've seen for a student, right? And so we changed it, and this is now the opening, or this was the opening. September 16th, 2015, Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. The first debate of the Republican presidential primary contest had just ended, and the candidates entered the spin room. Hordes of reporters rushed towards them, bombarding them with questions. Thanks to my small size, I was only 13, I burrowed my way through the throng of journalists to get to the candidates. Before the evening ended, I snagged interviews with Governors Walker, Huckabee, and Pataki on topics ranging from Common Core to environmental policy to their role models, blah, blah, blah. What do you mean you're 13, right? And then he ends, he says, and I got a photograph of Donald Trump's hair over the sea of reporters surrounding him, whatever. This is an example of something, an extraordinary event before high school that you can talk about, right? He's 13 years old. Generally, I would advise against it. But why is this kid getting to interview all these people? That's an extraordinary event. And now I want to know more, right? This kid ended up getting into Harvard. So And the other girl, by the way, got into University of Chicago. So I just wanted to hit you with a little bit of those before and afters. Would love to open it up to questions. Or sorry, let me keep that up, I guess. Would love to open it up to questions, yeah, and see what you have about the. I don't know if there were things that came through on the chat. I think I saw.
I think people have been mesmerized and listening. So if anyone wants to write a question in the chat or raise your hand, we can just jump right in. Mueller, anyone?
Yeah, the oh wait, someone just wrote something.
Terrified.
Absolutely terrified. Okay, so let me just calm that down. I think that's a good thank you to that to that person. So listen, what I would recommend, okay, first of all, is, you know, one of the reasons I brought up that Chinese student, and there's another one, if we had more time, I'd read you about how this girl mentioned that her grandparents live in a cave, right? Which is a crazy concept, right? But it actually isn't so crazy in China. There's actually 40 million people who live in a cave. I always want you to remember who is reading your essay, okay? It's a young, often well-educated American. And so don't forget, as you're thinking about your own heritage, right? Your ancestors, your grandparents, your parents, your cousins, whatever. Don't forget that things that may seem ordinary to you may be extraordinary to other people, right? Like, what do you mean you've never seen disabled people? Like, that's an insane concept to an American, right? So I think it's a good idea. Your idea can come from anywhere. Okay, it could be your own experience doing an extracurricular, maybe a community service, maybe a summer experience. It could be something that happened to you in school. You know, I have a student right now that is dealing with a good friend who committed suicide, right? Like, these are, you know, and a lot of times people say to me, like, but Perry, I'm not from China and I didn't go to the Super Bowl, right? Like, what do I, what am I, you know, what do I do? Like, I just live a normal life, right? I don't have a lot of conflict. You know, if you're one of the younger students on this talk, I would say, look, you know, do your best to get involved in a number of different activities that could maybe produce a great story at the end, right, in your senior year. The more you expose yourself to interesting and different, the more that you're likely to have an authentic essay. If you don't have any of those experiences, again, I've never had a kid not have anything to write about. There's always something somewhere. Okay, so think about your passions, think about your family, think about your friends, think about your school, think about where you live, think about what you've been, you know, what you've been involved in your life. Again, 9th grade and beyond. Someone asked a great question here. Does it really make a difference? Can a personal statement overcome GPA and activities? It's a good question. The answer is, look, if you've got a 3.2 GPA and the school needs a 3.9, like, no, it's not going to overcome. But it makes a massive difference once you get to, I think I gave the example last week about Yale, right? They had 35,000 applicants. This was back in 2019. Now they have, I think, 55,000. And they narrowed it down to the 8,700 kids who Yale felt should be accepted to Yale, right? So these are 8,700 stamp of approval. But they could only say yes to 2,000. So that's where the personal statement could make a massive difference, right? As we're comparing these two kids, what did I learn about this one that was so much more impressive than this one? I'm going to take this kid, right? So the answer is yes, it does make a difference. It is not going to help you overcome a GPA that is significantly below that school's GPA. That is for sure. This is not the old days. In the old days, maybe that could work. This is not the case anymore. There are too many kids who have the required GPA who have written great essays, right? So they can't go to someone below. But once you sort of cross those thresholds of GPA, test scores, course rigor, sort of like, okay, you've gotten over that hurdle. Now the essay could be the difference maker, frankly. So I do think it's critically important. Is there a resource to get ideas? No, I don't really have a resource per se. I do recommend talking to people like us, like counselors who have been doing this before, who have an eye for this stuff. One thing I will tell you to avoid is, you want to get feedback. It's always good if your English teacher will read it and get feedback, but that is a very different style of writing. So always if your English teacher is giving you feedback, take it with a grain of salt. They're not doing college admissions essays. They're working on the essay that you wrote about Scarlet Letter, right? So this is a different style of writing. So just be careful. But that said, I am a fan of getting their feedback because I think that, they can help with grammar, they can help with some content stuff. But get advice from people who have done it before. Get into your counselor's office early. One of the things I will recommend in terms of writing, it's one thing that we do as a company is we get juniors to start writing in their junior year. Okay. The reason we think this is so effective is that you guys, as you know, for the juniors who are going through it, like junior year is crazy, right? There's a lot of stress going on. Senior year gets even crazier. Kids are going back into the SAT, trying to up it another 20, 30, 40 points. They're trying to keep their grades high and they're applying to college. As I mentioned with Georgia Tech, right, with Cornell, these schools haven't changed their essays in years. There's no reason not to write it in your junior year. We think that if you spread out those supplemental essays over time, over the course of your junior year, right? So for you juniors, you're almost halfway there, right? But you've got 6-7 months. If you wrote 3 essays a month, 4 essays a month, you'd have almost all your college essays done by the time June came around. And then maybe over the summer, you work on your big essay. Now you're showing up to senior year. All of your peers are going to be freaking out because they're just getting started in this process. And it's very, very stressful. And you guys are going to be bored. So I highly, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just jumping in to say we're a tiny bit past time. And so we don't have to cut it off mid-sentence, but just being aware of that. And I want to draw attention to Steve's note in the chat that as a thank you and just a gift, really, Perry and his group have offered a consultation for those who want to do that and a 25% discount to the CVHS families if you decide that you want to proceed with, college counseling. And I sort of wanted to summarize what I heard, and Perry, tell me if this isn't accurate, but with regard to this personal statement and sort of getting started, that maybe starting with just sort of a brain dump of anything that comes to mind and don't filter it out, don't negotiate against yourself, but just like your experiences, your passions, your family, you said, the friends, what excites you, like experiences that sort of stand out as being like strange or challenging or anything, just get it on a list maybe. And then you can go from there.
Yeah, to use a cliche, which you should not do on your essay. The hardest thing, right, is always the hardest step is always the first one. Just start, just throw this stuff down. And by the way, I should mention also a very valuable tool. Use if you Google Common App essay prompts, the first link that comes up. Use the Common App essay prompts. There's 7 or 8 of them there as your sort of starting point, right? The question says, tell us about an obstacle you've overcome. Then you could start to narrow your focus onto like, okay, what obstacles have I overcome? Okay, nothing. Next one, right? And then go through and then start to come up with different ideas for those questions, because those are ultimately the questions you're going to answer. There is an seventh or eighth question that says, write about anything you want, right? So you don't have to feel constrained by the group of questions that they have. However, we think, yeah, in terms of like giving a little bit of structure to your brain dump, go question by question, sit down as a family and really start to brainstorm, how could we answer this question? And like I said, think about everything: grandparents, family, cousins, heritage, activities you do, summer experience, community service, all the things. Think about it in the context of everything you do and see if there's an answer. You do not need an answer for every single question. It turns out you only need one good one, right? So come up with ideas that you have for each one. If you have none, that's fine. Move on to the next one. And that can be a really good way to start your brain dump. And then, I am a big fan. If it is in your budget to talk to a private counselor and whatnot, to at least get some feedback on your idea, right? To go and sit there and write, like that poor kid, right? I read you his essay. He had to go back and start from zero. And I said to him, I wish you had come to me and pitched me this. I would have told you no from the start, right? So I am a big fan of talk to people who have done this before, and make sure you get that guidance, because it'll save you time and energy, right? Even if it's just one session with them, just to give you some direction.
Also, at most schools, or is there a trend or a practice in terms of how many readers? I know at some schools it's 3 people will read the entire app, and that I don't know what the
I would say the typical is 2 plus a tiebreaker if needed, right? So if 2 people read it and they're like, yes, boom, the third doesn't need to read it. If they say no, the third doesn't need to read it. If they say yes and no, then the third will read it, and they will be respectful of that third's decision, right? So that's sort of typical. But then you get schools like, UCLA, the UCs have 100,000, 140,000. Oftentimes you're not going to get the multiple reads there. But most schools, I would say, use that 2 plus a tiebreaker methodology behind their admissions.
Well, I thank you for your transparent, authentic, candid feedback and information, and for being so generous with your time and the information. Just even the list of don't do this and avoid these things. That's way more than I started with tonight. So I don't know. Maria, do you want to jump in?
I too am very, very grateful. And just having had one kid that went through this and graduated, something specific, I think I wish someone would have said to me. Carnegie kids are taught to be very independent of their parents, and for 99% of things, it's super helpful. I'd be surprised if there are many students on this call. It's probably mostly parents. And with my first child, typical first child, he was my easy bake oven. He did everything on his own. He got a perfect SAT. He had a 4.5. He was president of GSA. He, on paper, should have been able to write his ticket. And he did not get into many places that he thought he was going to. So our thought is that it was probably essay, because that's the one thing that is a black box. He's a robot. He's a math guy. He's an engineering student, and so that's not surprising. And I begged him to let me see his essays, because that's what I can do. Because we really don't know where he came from. But anyways, that's the point. He didn't let us in. So Carnegie parents, by the time they're seniors, you're kind of used to being hands off, a lot of us. It's a hard lesson to learn, but you learn it usually by the time they're doing their applications. So my advice is, don't let them, if they're like, we got this. If it's not you, make sure that they have somebody look at their essays.
Yes.
Especially that first kid that's really independent and has got it all together, even if they're president of 3 clubs and they have a job and they've started their own business and they've done everything perfectly. And you're like, there's no way they could screw up an essay. They might be able to screw up an essay. So that's just,
well, and people need
lesson learned.
feedback. It's like, just because I speak certain words doesn't mean that you receive them the same way I intended them. And so I think that's a good lesson for them to have as well. Like the independence is awesome. I think developmentally for this age group, it's great that they're doing so much on their own, and you learning is social too.
Yes.
So,
but that being said, everyone freaking out, they end up where they're supposed to be. They absolutely end up exactly where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, look, we have a crisis of privilege in this country. There's so many amazing schools. You may think X is your dream school. I always tell people about myself. I said, look, I understand that Williams, you heard me last week lambast the rankings. I hate them. I went to number 1 and I don't, if you hear me going against the rankings, you should know that I mean it. Williams may say number 1 in front of it, but for me personally, it was number 14 out of 14. I had zero intention of going to Williams College. Barbara, who's on the call, but not feeling great. We always joke how, there was a little bit of a forced shove in that direction. And I ended up at Williams and I ended up loving it. But I promise you, I didn't love it because it was of its ranking. I loved it because it actually was a great fit for me as a school, right? But it was the 14th great fit for me, right? So you really do end up where you need to be. There are no bad results. We have amazing colleges all over this country. But that said, you want to put your best foot forward, and hitting on what Maria was saying about, do not, I definitely recommend, I second that thought. Do not let your kid hit submit without having a number of people take a look, and preferably people who have experience. Because I am telling you, like, the number of times that we've heard feedback where I'm like, that's maybe true in an English class, or that's true in research, right? But that's not true in college admissions. Don't forget that college admissions is about storytelling. You need to tell a great story about yourself, and you should get that feedback from at least a couple of people. And like I said, preferably people who've had some experience, and can sort of shed some light on why something that you may have said doesn't really work, or why something that you didn't say would be really good to have in there. Right. And you might have not said it because you were nervous about sharing that or whatever. So I highly recommend getting that. And feel free if you, for the seniors, I think there's a couple grade 12s, I did have my QR code here. If you want to just schedule 10 minutes with me and pitch me your idea for your essay, happy to just give you some instant feedback. And, because too late for the early round, but the regular decision round, there's plenty of time. So you can go back to the drawing board if necessary. So.
And we'll start sooner next year.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.
No
very
problem.
much.
It's so great to meet everybody.
Thank you all for being here, and thanks for sharing your email addresses and everything. So you all can take it from here. We will see you next week. We're going to have the Menninger Clinic come and talk about mental health and how to intervene and when to intervene, and how to help your children know how to help their friends, because they're more likely to go to their friends when they're in distress than an adult in high school. And we believe on the College Readiness Committee that if you are not well, you're not ready you're not college ready. So next week, we're going to do sort of more of a triage conversation, and then we'll bring Menninger back next year in 2024, next term, to talk a little more about just skill building and how to sort of build those mental health and social emotional skills that will help transition you through, or your kids through, the college admission phase, but also into college and being able to succeed and thrive and stay there and graduate. So those are some of the things coming up. We're also going to talk about test prep and some other things. So stay tuned and join us next week if you're available.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Danielle.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Barry. Thank you.